very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and my special guest is Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Cave Campus, Professor Clive Landis. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you. Now, the Cave Campus is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So I want to start at the very beginning. Let's take a brief history. Let's have a brief history lesson
Sure.
about the campus.
Okay. Well, it started in 1963, and we had our first principal who was here for a year. He was a mathematician and administrator from Jamaica called Leslie Robinson. And Leslie Robinson, I think, is a little bit of an overlooked figure. And in our 60th anniversary launch parade, my predecessor, Professor Barreto, and we unveiled a portrait to Leslie Robinson, appropriately in the Leslie Robinson building. So he started the campus in a temporary structure in the Deepwater Harbor with 118 students in 1963. And then during that time, the conception of the Cave Hill campus in its current location was ongoing. The actual cornerstone of the campus was laid in 1966. And by then, Principal Sidney Martin, who served from 1964 to 1983, he was the principal at the time. And it started as the College of Arts and Sciences. And then the first faculty was the Faculty of Law. And since then, we now have another 6 faculties, so we now have 7 faculties here. And if we just continue the progression, Sir Keith Hunt, he was the principal from 1983 to 2002. And of course, Sir Hilary Beckles, well known to everyone, he was the principal from 2002 to 2015. And then my predecessor, Professor Udine Barreto, the Most Honourable Udine Barreto, she served from 2015 to 2021.
You mentioned that Cave Hill has 7 faculties. I know that you offer just over 350 programs, so quite a lot of programs. You can't touch on every program, obviously, but let's look at the 7 faculties and a bit of what each has to offer.
Sure. So the Faculty of Law, obviously it offers its LLB and LLM, and the Faculty of Medicine offers the MBBS, which is the undergraduate degree to become a doctor. It has various diploma, DMs as they're called, which is Doctors of Medicine, and those would be in various specialities, things like ophthalmology and internal medicine, etc. So we would take practitioners all the way to their specialities. And then we would have the Faculty of Social Sciences. That's the largest faculty. In people's minds, I think they think about, well, this must be about social work. And indeed, that is one component of one department. But social sciences is a very, very broad umbrella, which encompasses the business school, so the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management. It would cover things like accounts, management, some new programs we have there, like business analytics, and it has politics, psychology. It's a very big faculty. Then you would have the Faculty of Humanities and Education. So that would be things like languages, literature, history, philosophy, education. So the School of Education is a distinct entity. And then we have the Faculty of Science Technology. So we'd have computer science, physics, etc., and biological and chemical sciences. And then we have the Faculty of Culture, Creative and Performing Arts. So that would be culture, it would be theatre arts. We also have finally the Faculty of Sport. So the Faculty of Sport is an interesting faculty because it's pan-university. So it has one dean who is a university dean, and then the various academies on the different campuses. So we have the Academy of Sport here. But that's the full span of it.
Of the faculties. Now, you mentioned the popular programs like law and medicine, but in many instances, you have more applications than you have spaces.
Yes. So the university has what are called its matriculation requirements. These have been quite in the news in the last 3 years because they were actually partially waived to enable the throughput of students because of the impacts of COVID. But they basically set a minimum requirement. But other faculties, particularly the professional faculties, providing degrees for professions, things like for law and for medicine, they would have their own requirements, which are over and above the matriculation requirements.
But while those faculties are in most instances oversubscribed, you have a lot of programs that you would like students to go into, but they're not.
Well, one would always have, we want our students to achieve as much as they can with the gifts that they have so that they can, be active, happy members of society. So we don't really have programs that we want people to go into. We want to provide programs which are relevant to society. And, if you look at the trend in recent years, it is to go for more applied programs. So I might give a few examples. I mentioned business analytics. We would also have programs like in health, instead of just having doctors and things like that, what about health policy and health systems? So we set up a diploma program in public health policy and public health systems. And programs might also become a bit shorter, so and would be created with partners in mind. That previous program in public health was actually created with PAHO, and lo and behold, PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, paid for the first intake of students because the whole idea is to build capacity for the Caribbean. And the shorter program I was referring to is a certificate in digital marketing, which has just come on the books this month. And that was created in conjunction with Yellow Media, so the Yellow Pages. And it came with 40 internship places right at the outset. So this is something we're very keen to do, is to build our programs with partners so that they're fully relevant immediately.
I want to come back to the shorter courses a little later, but when I speak of programs that you would like students to enter into, I'm talking about things like software engineering. Now, that's a program that offers excellent prospects for graduates, but you're not getting the uptake.
We are getting some uptake. So we would like to see more, just because it's such an exceptional program. It's a 2+2 program where you spend the first 2 years here, and then you spend the next 2 years with the Global Institute for Software Technology in Suzhou in China. And, inevitably, basic language proficiency in Chinese is part of the program. And when students come back, oh boy, they have a different worldview. And our employers have said that they just love them. So we had a private sector forum on the 31st of March last year, and we had a testimony from the Crane Hotel, who had employed 2 of our software engineering graduates. And they basically said, well, we used to send all these software solutions out and refer them to the US, but now we just keep them in-house because we have the expertise right here.
Let's look at your enrollment figures over the last 10 years specifically. Trends, are they worrying, expected?
Well, it's been quite turbulent if you take a 10-year viewpoint, because in August of 2013 is when the requirement to pay tuition fees was introduced. That came into effect in the start of academic year 2014, had a very dramatic impact on student enrollment. We lost 20% of our student body in the first year. And by the time that 2017, 2018 came along, when the policy was reversed, we actually lost 40% of our student body, which is quite an exceptionally high number by any standards. Looking in the literature, and we just went through our accreditation review in November, where we had external accreditors came in, and they said they'd never seen a university survivor drop of that magnitude and still be here.
So how did you survive?
I think we survived by becoming more efficient and concentrating on service to students, because there are two things which determine your student body. One is how many students you take in, and the other is how many students you retain. So if you lose a lot of students along the way, you're really not doing your job, and your student body is shrinking. So we just concentrated our resources on the student experience, and our retention rates, which are tracked internationally, they have been consistently over 90%. And that's the proportion of students who registered in the first year who then still register for the second year. And 90% is the international benchmark. So, I think that is a way in which we coped. And, we had, I think there was a lot of support, a lot of unity within the campus that we were going to get through this, and we did.
If you could give me some hard stats, though, in terms of the numbers from 2013 versus 2022.
Sure. Yes, so we had over 8,000 students in 2013, and we ended up at our lowest point with around 4,600 students. We are now, what happened is that we recovered quite swiftly when the free tuition was restored for undergraduate degrees for Barbadian citizens. But we leveled off, still around about 20% below. So the latest figures I have is 6,743 for the last academic year. And so the last 3 years, we haven't shrunk, but we've just plateaued. And obviously, that was the time of COVID. So there was that factor as well. But the analysis shows that there's something slightly deeper going on. That the introduction of tuition fees, it triggered a change in our student demographic that actually has not recovered since the reintroduction of free tuition. And that is that we have lost a lot of our mature students, a lot of our part-time students, and they're not coming back. And so this is really a concern to us. Until we did the analysis, it wasn't really obvious that this was the case. Most of the discussion, most of the mitigation that was put in place had to do with continuing the throughput of students from secondary school into the university and continuing their careers. But what we hadn't appreciated is that the huge impact that there would be on part-time students and mature students aged 25 to 44, that was really dramatic. And so, it peaked around 60% drop for those populations, and it's still over 40% down.
That is significant.
It's very huge.
Yeah.
So if you actually just look at the average age of our undergraduate student body, it was 35 in 2013. It's now 25.
Great. And then the mature group?
Well, it's very concerning. I mean, this was something which I think no one had really spoken about or anticipated. It was an unanticipated outcome. But I think it really has impacted the professional development of working Barbadians.
And I guess we haven't factored in the whole work-life balance, because it's difficult to study and work.
I think that is the area where we are certainly conscious that, particularly after the COVID pandemic, which for all its faults, did allow a more flexible working way of working, that we have to actually now concentrate on that area to try and make learning a bit more flexible so that people can balance those demands of home and work.
If we look at the student body here, in terms of Barbadian students go all over the world and study, are you getting the international students that you would like?
We always have around about 23% of international students, and I include Caribbean international students and extra-regional students. The proportion of international students who come from outside the Caribbean, it's relatively minimal. It's around about 140, and we really want to bring that up. It makes sense to bring it up because it brings diversity to our campus. It enriches the student experience for everyone.
It brings revenue.
It puts Barbados on the map in the minds of people who are, upwardly mobile in the world, and it brings in revenue, of course. Yeah.
Now, former principal Professor Sir Hilary Beckles had a vision for a university graduate in every household. Do you have any research to indicate how far or how close we are away from that target?
I'm not aware of research. I think as a target, I still like it because I do fully believe that a university education, is a path to prosperity that was envisaged right at the outset in the first graduation address that Prime Minister Barrow gave to this campus on this site. It was in 1968, and I'm quoting him here, he said, "As a settled conviction, the efficient running of a university is almost the only path to prosperity."
So the Cave Hill campus is producing well-rounded graduates every year. However, these graduates are coming out to university. They're either underemployed or unemployed. Is that a concern that we're not having the jobs for these graduates?
Yeah, it is. So we do tracker surveys of our graduates, and the majority find work, but do they find work in their field?
Exactly.
And that is really the key. And so, although the emphasis for many years has been on the Faculty of Science Technology, the so-called STEM disciplines, it is actually that faculty that, has some of the most difficulty in finding jobs in their sector. And so what we believe our responsibility is to grow the sector. So it is not just to produce graduates for the sector, it is to be part of the growth of the sector. And that's a very deliberate policy now. So, to give an example, in biological sciences, chemistry and biological sciences, we have set up the first for-profit center that this campus has had, and that is the Center for Commercial Analytical Services. So we have very sophisticated equipment here. We even have what's known as nuclear magnetic resonance, which is very high-end equipment, very difficult to maintain and use. And we use it for our research in marine biology, looking at micronutrients and things like that in the sea. But it can be used to look at food quality. It can be used for certifying foods that they are of the origin which you say they are. So, if you want to, for example, export Barbadian rum and you want to certify that it's Barbadian, there's a signature that you can pick up and you can certify it and say, I certify this is a Barbadian product. And there's things to do with water quality. All of these things we can undertake. Also, we have a medical device manufacturer, of course, on this island, Lenstech, which makes intraocular lenses. And they too would refer a lot of their analytical tests abroad. So we'll be launching and officially opening the Center for Commercial Analytical Services in the first week of March. And that is going to be providing services for the country, and it's going to be saving on that foreign exchange, which is leaking out, and it's creating the sector.
Speaking of leaking out, now, we mentioned that some graduates are not finding jobs, especially in the areas that they've studied. Barbados can only provide a limited number of opportunities. Do you see a situation where we will be facing a brain drain problem?
Well, I think the Caribbean has always faced a brain drain challenge. We have to make our societies as attractive as possible to attract people, not only to retain them, but also to attract them back from the diaspora. And I'm actually very confident that Barbados is on that trajectory. So I'm definitely an optimist when I look into the future. What we saw in the COVID-19 pandemic is this long-term trend and realizing itself, which is that people who are very mobile, they take their work with them. Why wouldn't you want to work here as opposed to, in a cold and damp Newcastle in the middle of winter? No disrespect to Newcastle, but we have such a conducive environment here, and the welcome stampers were really only, I think, the first wave of what I view is a long-term trend. So I think Barbados is an attractive destination, and we want to be very much part of that. So we have in our strategy is encapsulated creating value from our ideas. So we have lots of research, and when you look at the academic measures of how we publish, etc., we're very productive as a university, and you probably know that the Times Higher Education has ranked UWI in the top 1.5% of universities in the world. It comes from our research, but we want to create value from our ideas, take that research, create value for society, and also create value for ourselves. So that example I just gave of the Commercial Analytical Center for Commercial Analytical Services, it's creating value for Barbados, because then all of these tests which are being outsourced and losing foreign exchange are being retained. Yeah. And yet at the same time, it's a for-profit center. It's making money for us, creating value from our ideas. That is what we want to do in our strategy.
No, I want to go back to the point of not being promised a job upon graduation. Mm-hmm. In light of this, are people still placing the emphasis on higher education that they did, let's say, 10, 20 years ago?
I think so. I think people are, they value the education. In fact, if anything, I think because of the, when you speak about quality and ranking, these are things that you can't do yourself. You can't pat yourself on the back. You have to open yourself to external scrutiny. So our journey to be an accredited university, that began nearly 20 years ago, and we're now a fully accredited university. So our degrees would be recognized. Let's say a student went to Harvard or something like that, they wouldn't blink an eye because we're fully accredited. And so that's in terms of accreditation. Then in terms of ranking, when you rank a university, all of these standards that you have to provide information on and data, it's really a deep level of scrutiny, which encompasses, your methods of teaching, how often you renew your curriculum, what your research output is, what your industry partnerships are, and then you receive a ranking, and it's a completely independent body, and they have ranked the university so highly. So we should be very, very proud of that. And I do believe that if there were discussions which might have been held 20 years ago, people questioning, what is the quality of this university, those questions are fully answered, not by us, by external accrediting bodies and ranking agencies. So I think everyone appreciates the quality of this university, and that is not in question. So I think people value having a degree from this university. And I think the evolution of our offerings is towards more applied subjects. So I think that's a normal movement.
All right, Professor Landis, still a lot more to discuss regarding the UWI Cave Hill campus. Stay with us. You're watching One on One.
Tell me who a man spends his time with, and I'll tell you the type of man he is. Isn't it true that people become like the company they keep? I'm Chris Hurdle, clinical psychologist and certified life coach. Where do you spend most of your time? What is your emotional space like? Do you find yourself most often among people who are negative, naysayers, doom and gloom, or fearmongers? Or do you find yourself mostly among people who are positive, optimistic, calm, collected, and reassuring, who exude confidence? What is your emotional space like? Be intentional, You are the pilot of your life.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, Professor Clive Landis. Professor, now the Cave Hill campus has several agreements with private sector entities. Are you satisfied with the level of private sector engagement at the campus?
Not as yet. So it's been a major emphasis to increase the engagement with the private sector. So we had the inaugural private sector forum on the 31st of March last year, and this was supported by the Prime Minister, so at the highest level, and the chair of the Barbados Private Sector Association. And that really, I think, set us on the path. And we said that we wanted to have a private sector engagement every 6 months. We're actually ahead of that. So we're now on our third one. It hasn't even been 18 months yet.
And in terms of the sector offering internships for your graduates?
Yeah. So that's a continually increasing and improving. And, more particularly, we're now getting to the point where some of the research and ideas that we have by working with the private sector, that they're now reaching the point of licensing agreements or nearing manufacturing. So we have some very exciting developments in the pipeline.
Let's look at the area of research. It's an area that the campus has faced a lot of criticism about. You have the expertise, the skill set, the know-how, but we're not getting data in several critical areas.
Okay, well, I have to disagree with you there. So when you look at, figures that we just bandy about on a sort of common level, maybe the World Economic Forum or something, those figures are produced by the Solicitors Department here at Cave Hill. They're produced for the country. Now, if there's a criticism that's valid, it's that we don't let people know what we do. So until you actually read the annual report, because they're produced every year, you wouldn't know that it was us who was producing it. And we're now putting together a register and a database of all of the areas where people serve. So where our staff members, not just academic staff, but other staff members serve on national, regional bodies, serve on boards of companies. We're putting together a register. And when we've completed that database, it will be searchable by people like you, by the public, so that people can see what we do, because we do an awful lot. So I would just maybe pick out a few examples, but more than half of our academics serve on national bodies or higher. So if you look at the Board of Management of Erdison Teachers College, the chair of that is the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning here at Cave Hill, called Dr. Sylvia Henry. And this is commonplace. You would probably know that the head of the NAS for many years was Professor Justin Robinson. And this is absolutely commonplace for us to serve. So we do serve. Where I think there is some validity is, is the research applied, or is it known that it's applied? So let me just use the example of some research which has really entered the public domain and people enjoy it. So that would be the radio program Today in Bajan History. So Today in Bajan History, by popular demand, is now played 12 times a day across the Starcom network because people like it. And that isn't from some textbook. All of those historical vignettes are our own primary research. Research by our professors, research by our students, and sometimes our students are presenting it. And so that's an example where our research, is creating value in society. To use the Prime Minister's phrase, these are humanizing influences. When you hear about these historical stories about people who impacted Barbados and Barbadian life, and so I think it is incumbent upon us to make it known what we do. But certainly I would reject that our research is in some way not adequate, nor our levels of service.
The last 3 years have been exceptionally difficult as we struggle through the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, you are the chair of the UE COVID-19 task force. I want us to review in a holistic manner the impact of COVID-19
Sure, sure.
on the campus.
Well, it had a massive impact, as it did on all of us. Within 1 week of the pandemic reaching our shores in the Caribbean, which was on the 11th of March 2020, we had closed our doors, and we moved teaching online within 2 weeks. And across the university, a similar story was played out. The open campus actually, they never even missed a day because most of their offerings are online anyway. I want to say that the Caribbean as a whole, so in my position as chair of the task force, I've published multiple articles analyzing the pandemic response of the Caribbean, and compared to leading countries like the US, like the UK, like the European Union, we had very successful management of the pandemic. When you look at figures like cases per million, deaths per million, if you normalize according to size, it means you can compare small with large, you can compare with regions. And the Caribbean is actually well known in public health circles for having managed this pandemic well. And I think what we see is a couple of factors which played into that. So I think leadership was one. So CARICOM really, I think, rose to the task. The chair of CARICOM at the time when the pandemic broke out was Prime Minister Mia Moore-Motley. And she was very determined that there should only be one set of evidence that we consider. She said, UWI is the university as decreed by the Grand Aunt's Declaration, by CARICOM, for the region in perpetuity. This is our university. They will be tasked with providing the data. And we set about that with relish. So at the peak of the pandemic, we were producing statistics for every single CARICOM country, including the associate member states, so 20 English-speaking and also Dutch-speaking, of course, Haiti as well, cases and deaths per day, every day. And then for other countries, we would provide services. So the Barbadian government, they asked us to model the impact of lockdowns. What would happen if we didn't lock down? What would happen if we locked down, or if we locked down rather slowly? And we provided those figures to the government. We ran exactly the same models that Imperial College ran in the UK, and we provided that data to the government, and they based their decisions upon it. And when we had our outbreak of COVID-19, full community outbreak at the end of 2020 into January of 2021, they came back to us and they said, how many contact tracers do we need to get on top of this outbreak? And we again ran the models and we said, you need 155. That's who they employed. And we got on top of it. And our students, of course, were part of that. 400 volunteer students going out with the army and public health workers to map the pandemic around the country, visiting every household. So these are the ways that the university got involved with the COVID response. And I also want to say that our disaster and emergency management agencies, SEDEMA, of course, which is based here in Barbados, and the security services like IMPACS and RSS, they did a fantastic job. And we, at the maximum, we were meeting weekly. So I would represent the university, meeting with the Pan American Health Organization that represents the WHO. Of course, Dr. Joy St. John, another Barbadian who is head of the Caribbean Public Health Agency. She's a good friend of mine. And she did a magnificent job. And we all met and combined all of our expertise every single week to help manage the pandemic. So, I think the Caribbean should really understand that we managed this pandemic well. And they should be proud of the systems that we have. Most of these would be CARICOM systems.
And obviously, given your background as a virologist and immunologist, you would have been looking at COVID-19 through completely different lens to the average person.
Well, I did and I didn't. Yes, I was analyzing it, but it affected me just like everybody else. So, that is why I've published a number of papers on it, because I was able to analyze in a comparative sense what the management was and using objective indicators of the Caribbean compared to the rest of the world.
I know that I have you as an expert. Let me just veer off slightly from UWI and stick on COVID-19. What lessons should Barbadians learn from COVID-19 in the sense of preparing for another virus?
I think we have to understand that these kind of viral outbreaks, they are now part of our landscape. So, and one of the reasons why we did a little bit better than other regions is that we actually had more experience. So if you look back, we had the chikungunya outbreak in 2013. In fact, we had the so-called swine flu outbreak in 2009. But everyone in the world had that. But for most people in the world, that was their last experience. But we had the chikungunya in 2013, then we had Zika in 2016. In between, we had the Ebola scare. And then, of course, came the big one in 2020. And we were pretty ready. I was particularly impressed with the growth in the region, the Caribbean region's ability to undertake these tests. We take them completely for granted that there's 6 cases there, there's 20 cases here, there's 100 cases there. When we started, I did a lot of work in HIV. There were only 3 machines that could do this work in the Caribbean. Now there's literally dozens, and practically the last flight out of Washington to the Caribbean had all of our senior lab techs who went for training on the gold standard technique, which was the German test. And we were all ready. And we had these machines, 10 countries in the Caribbean could actually test for this. And then the others were connected by the RSS to reference labs. So, it was really, I think, good to see how we had grown that capacity to cope with something like this. And I think we will be more prepared next time and more confident that we can manage something like this. And if I think there's one area where I think we have to rethink a bit, I think the overlooked population and those who were impacted very heavily, I think were children and people of school age. I do believe that they should have been handled in somewhat different ways, but that's the benefit of hindsight, and there's so much research that's right now going on looking at this across the world.
But I'm glad that you mentioned children, because you have a situation now, we hear about vaccine hesitancy all the time. We had a very good childhood vaccination program, and now parents are even missing the appointments to take their children to get vaccinated.
Well, the very first talk that I gave on COVID-19 was on the 29th of January in 2020. And that was the day when the public health emergency was declared, not the pandemic, that came in March. And guess what? The UWI was actually announcing the task force at that point. We were a month ahead. We were ready. And the main point of my talk at that point was that we're facing 2 pandemics. We're facing a viral pandemic and we're facing a misinformation pandemic. That was obvious right from the get-go. And so, people are consuming information that is very often inaccurate, it's misleading, and then, of course, sometimes it's designed to mislead. It's not a sort of an honest mistake. It is deliberately designed to cause harm. Unfortunately, that is the world that we live in. And, what is happening now is that due to this adult vaccination campaign, adult vaccination campaigns are kind of separate from childhood vaccination campaigns. And there's always been more discussion, more hesitancy around those. So that's not new. But this has polarized people in such a way that it's now impacting the childhood vaccination campaigns. Well, the childhood vaccination campaigns, have basically, if you look at the statistics for this region, Latin America and the Caribbean, have added 25 years of life to our population, where the average age was 50 in the 1960s, and it's now 75. And almost all of that has been due to the elimination of all the childhood diseases. So, to say that it's a tragedy would be an understatement. I strongly urge parents to not allow, this polarized, in some ways toxic debate that has gone on with COVID-19 and the vaccinations to, in some way, spoil what has been, one of the greatest public health achievements in the Caribbean and has tangibly added life to our children so that they can go into adulthood. And these are very well-established, long-standing vaccination campaigns. They do not deserve to somehow be called into question.
Switching our focus back to the Cave Hill campus now. From time to time, I get a notification from Cave Hill about a new certificate or some type of short course being offered. And this is quite different to your standard undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, because everybody doesn't want to do a degree.
Sure.
They just want to bump up their certification.
Yeah, that's absolutely part of the trend that we're very much a part of. So a lot of these would be shorter. A lot of these would actually be online. And we're consolidating them all in what's known as the Center for Professional Development and Lifelong Learning, and that itself is consolidated within the business school. The business school is managing all of these short courses. We approved one the day before yesterday. That would have been last Thursday, and that was a certificate in teacher education for effective teaching. So it's teaching professionals in the business how to be an effective teacher, how to get your message across to children. And we've deliberately set it up not only to be short, so it has 24 contact hours, but it's online and it's flexible. So if you have on average 3 hours per week and it's for 8 weeks, you will complete your certificate. So it's perfectly designed for the busy teacher who wants to become a more effective teacher. So that's typical of what we're doing.
I want to say post-COVID, but we're still very much in the COVID-19 pandemic. But since the start of the pandemic, is that something you're seeing, a greater demand for more courses to be online?
Yes, that demand had already been there, and now I think it's been amplified. But I couldn't let that comment go without responding. Are we still in a pandemic? I think people have to understand how pandemics end. This is how a pandemic ends. Look at us. We're sitting here. None of us are wearing masks. And COVID is here, but this is how it ends. It becomes endemic. So there are already in the population 4 coronaviruses. They have been with us for thousands of years. They've just become, a flu. And now we have seen in technicolor detail how a pandemic evolves to now, it's just now another coronavirus in the population. It will be with us forever. But, it's now just another flu. And it's not in any way because this year we've been able to compare between the flus because they've been spreading a lot. It's by no means the most severe of the season. So it is now just another flu.
The financial struggles of UWI, well articulated in the media. I want to look at the financial health of the Cave Hill campus.
Well, the financial health is good in the sense that, we have auditors, external auditors. They audit our finances. They audit the UWI's finances every year. We've never had a negative audit report. So let's just put that on the table first. So our finances are stable. Now, it is true that the university itself has received a decreasing subvention from governments over the years. And so here at Cave Hill, we're no exception. We probably had our largest approved budget in 2013. And in the intervening 10 years, that budget has decreased by about 30%.
13?
30.
30.
30. And so we've had to learn how to live within our means. And, I have to be honest, sometimes that does mean that it's the physical infrastructure that, we find it sometimes difficult to be proactive in the way that, we're renewing buildings. We would love to replace our Faculty of Science Technology, and, we wouldn't have the money from a capital sense that we used to have a bigger capital budget. We have a budget that we manage well, and we're delivering our programs, and the quality is there. So, I don't think we should overstate the financial situation, but it has obviously become much, much tighter.
And you don't want to give me any stats, Professor,
Well,
in terms of where you are
I've
now
given
and
you
where
this.
you should be.
I would like to get back to that kind of budget that we used to have.
How many millions are we talking about?
Well, we would be looking at about 40 million per year that we would like to come back, and that's almost exactly the target which has been set in the UWI. Of course, Cave Hill is part of a bigger UWI.
Yes.
The UWI's 5-year plan, which is 2022 to 2027. I mean, the theme gives it away. It's called the revenue revolution. We are trying to generate our own revenue, and we have a target. So the target for the Cave Hill campus is 21.2 million per year is what we would like to bring our revenue back up. And this is through our own entrepreneurial activities. That's very important to us. And that is, of course, also why our Cave Hill theme of creating value from our ideas, yes, value for society, but value for UWI as well. And so, I might give you, so there are 2 pillars on which that will ultimately rest. One is internationalization, to bring in international students to sell our knowledge products abroad. So we want to grow the international student number to 200 within the next 2 years, and we want to continue growing it in the years ahead. The second is the export of knowledge products. So I'll give an example. The Faculty of Law Library has an unparalleled collection of legal cases from the whole Caribbean. They've put those all together. It's been a sort of 20+ year project to do so. And they are all aggregated and disseminated through a professional legal data analytics site in London on a subscription basis. Brings us in around about 600,000 Barbados dollars per year. So that's exporting our knowledge. And, we want to do similar things for other collections, unique collections that we have within our libraries, within our archives, aggregate them together. People are interested about the Caribbean, not just about Caribbean legal cases, but about the Caribbean as a whole. And we believe that there's a subscription market to those kind of things.
So a solid 5-year strategic plan.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I started the program by indicating that 2023, this is your 60th anniversary. Tell me about some of the plans you have to celebrate.
Yeah. Well, we had our launch parade
Yes.
on Friday. We're very happy that it really brought out everyone. It was lovely to see people walking under all the different banners. So, yes, we had people from our support services and also my predecessor, of course, Professor Barrett. It was wonderful to be marching at the front of the parade with me, other Pro-Vice Chancellors, Deputy Principals from the past who have served at Cave Hill. But then going out, all of our faculties, but then you had also the societies. So you had like the Debating Society, and you had the student associations from other countries, so, Grenada and Bahamas and Jamaica, and they were all walking under their banners. And then we had our retirees, and we had our alumni. And it really was a fantastic occasion where the community, I think, came together. And then 2 days later was our first historic parish hike. So it's a brilliant concept because, well, I'm still a public health person. So, you get your 10,000 steps in, walking up and down gullies. But you're learning about history. So maybe some of those things that you listen to on Today in page in history, you actually get to see the sites. And we had 200 people registered. So these are monthly. They're going through all the parishes. And we're looking forward to very, high outreach. The public seems very interested. And then we have more specialized tours which take into account, our independence, our emancipation journey. So we have an emancipation bus tour, of course, on the 1st of August. We have an independence bus tour, which would take us around various sites relevant to independence on the 30th of November. So these would be some of the events and the outreach that we're doing for the public.
What is your vision as principal for the Caveville campus?
My vision as principal is for us to use our research and leverage it for benefit in society and for our own benefit. And I'm very determined that we should actually communicate more effectively with the public so that they know what's happening in their university. This is a public university, and we need to share what we're doing. Not just do it, but share what we're doing so the public knows.
As an academic, what is your single greatest concern regarding education in Barbados? And I ask that from the perspective, what we do at the primary level will affect the type of student you get here at the campus.
Well, we are blessed with a strong education system in Barbados. I think, having said that, you will hear every time that exams come by that there are certain weaknesses which are not being corrected, that they're sort of becoming embedded in the system in English, written English in particular, and also mathematics. So, these are issues, they don't stop our students when they come into our university. We have some mandatory foundation courses, and one of them would be in the English usage for your subject. So we can cope with that. But in terms of the educational system itself in Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, what we're doing is we have reinstituted the Center for Educational Research, and that is a pretty big grant, around about $7 million US, where half of it was provided from USAID and half of it is actually provided by us. With our staff being committed to do this. It's a very systematic research for the Barbados and the whole Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean, so that eventually it will make recommendations.
I'm a parent at home watching or listening to this program, a student trying to make up my mind about choosing a university, whether here or overseas. Why should I choose Caveville?
Well, it's your university. The University of the West Indies is, I think Rex Nettleford said, is the Caribbean's greatest gift to itself. I would like to know, in the Caribbean, has there been an institution that's been created by the Caribbean that is more successful than the University of the West Indies? We're in the top 1.5% of universities. Many times, when we see students whose parents might decide to send them to another university, they're not in a ranked university. They might be in a university that's abroad, but, look at it objectively. There are ranking agencies, and, if you find another university that's equivalent in our rank or higher, well, then you're choosing a path, and I respect it. But, don't discount the university that has been created by the Caribbean, and look at it now. I mean, it's a very successful, durable institution.
Professor Landis, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I can see you're very passionate about the Caveville campus, and we appreciate all that you and your team here are doing.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
You're most welcome. That was Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Caveville campus, Professor Clive Landis. I am Lisa Lord. You are watching One on One. Do have yourself a wonderful evening.